"You'll be in row 14 next to the service area," the coordinator droned while my daughter-in-law smiled coldly. "My family will lose face if your poverty shows." My son lowered his head and stayed silent. No defense, not a single kind look. In the glittering hall, over strings and clinking glasses, I, the groom's mother, was seated behind even the photographers. I tightened my grip on the champagne flute, hearing the glass tremble in my hand. 10 years a widow, 40 years raising a child, and all I was worth was a seat at the very end. I didn't cry. I lifted my chin and walked straight to the last row as if I was stepping over my life's worst humiliation. And when I sat down, a silver-haired man in a sleek black suit placed his hand over mine and whispered, "Let's pretend we came together." I turned, my heart stopping. He was the first love I thought I'd lost forever. They had no idea that from that moment on, the one getting pushed out of a seat today wouldn't be me. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. My name is Mabel Carter, 66, widowed for 3 years. I taught English at a public high school on Chicago's South Side for more than 40 years. I'm not wealthy, but I get by on my pension and the small house my husband and I owned. I thought I'd made peace with loneliness after my husband Harold died of lung cancer. But today, at my son's lavish wedding, I finally understood. Real loneliness is when people are alive and still deny you basic respect. The ceremony was at the Devon Estate, a sprawling property owned by Camille's family, the very people who never accepted me from day one. Everything felt so showy, it was almost numb. Tables draped in crisp white. Moet and Chandon flowing like a stream. Guests in designer labels and white roses stretching out like Versailles in my clean but worn navy dress. I felt like an ink stain on a luxury canvas. When staff pointed me to my seat, I almost couldn't believe it. Row 14, directly behind the service area after the photographers and the flower handlers. Up front, Camille's mother, Patricia Devon, sat among a row of society women in gleaming pearls. They looked at me and murmured. I clearly heard one say to the woman beside her, "Is that the groom's mother?" I heard she taught at a public school. Must have been rough. Another gave a small laugh, her voice dripping with disdain. I heard she had to pick up extra shifts at the library just to make ends meet. I said nothing. I sat on the cold chair, back straight, hands on my lap, willing myself not to shake. Up at the front, Bryce looked different. Tailored suit, perfect smile, standing with the ease of someone who'd forgotten what it meant to be poor. I remembered the little boy who came home with muddy sleeves, handed me a bunch of dandelions, and said, "Mom, these are for you because you're the prettiest in the world." I smiled, then felt my nose sting. Where did that little boy go? The music rose. Camille came down the aisle in a wedding gown so long it needed 2 people to carry. Light flashed off the diamonds at her throat, making me squint. She never looked at me, not once. I was a shadow she wanted erased from the frame. Just as I was about to lower my head to escape the contempt around me, the chair beside me slid. An older man, silver hair shining in the sun, sat down. A whisper of bergamot cologne drifted over. He wore a Swiss watch. His movements were slow, refined. I thought he'd made a mistake and was about to say something when I heard his voice low, steady, certain. "Let's pretend we came together." I froze. He leaned in with a calm smile and gently set his hand over my clenched one. The touch made me stiffen for a few seconds, but strangely there was no embarrassment, only warmth. From the front, I saw guests beginning to turn. Their eyes changed from pity to curiosity and then slowly to caution. A woman in a feathered hat whispered to her husband, "Who's that man with the groom's mother? He looks powerful." I didn't turn, but I caught the hint of a smile at the corner of the man's mouth. On the stage, Bryce glanced down, and his gaze landed on us. In that instant, his face went pale. I saw his lips move like he wanted to ask something but didn't dare. Camille followed his stare. When she saw me smiling, speaking with the mysterious man, her face went rigid. I didn't know what game I'd been pulled into, but I could feel the power dynamic shift. Those who'd looked down on me were now more careful. Those who had turned away began to watch. I tilted my head and whispered, "I don't understand what you're doing." Without looking at me, he said, "Just smile. Your son's about to look again." I did. When Bryce glanced down a second time, he looked as if he'd seen the impossible. In the very spot where he'd arranged for his own mother to be humiliated, I now seemed to be seated with a man worthy of the front row, maybe even their betters. "Perfect," he murmured, squeezing my hand a bit. "Now they don't know where to place you in their picture anymore." I looked at him, a mix of surprise and gratitude in my chest. "Who are you?" I asked softly, just for him to hear. He tilted his head, deep blue eyes holding an answer I'd waited for my whole life. "Someone you should have crossed paths with again a long time ago." I didn't have time to grasp it all. The minister kept speaking, violins kept playing, and all eyes stayed on the couple. But I knew with a few light touches and a smile, the entire order of this event had cracked. Half skeptical, half curious looks stayed on us through the ceremony. I caught fragments of whispers. "Is he someone in finance? He looks familiar. Wasn't he on the cover of Forbes?" I didn't reply, only pressed my lips together and looked up at the platform where my son vowed himself to a woman who had tried to banish his mother to the service row. Oddly enough, I felt calm. Maybe because for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. A breeze from the garden brushed my hair as if whispering, "It's time, Mabel." I didn't know why the words rang in my head, but my heart did. This wasn't Bryce's wedding day anymore. It was the day I came back to myself. I didn't know who the man beside me truly was or why he chose to help. But from the way he held my hand and redirected the room's gaze, I sensed something was about to change for good. When the applause started, I stood up on instinct. He leaned toward my ear and said, "Let them wonder." I looked around. The people who pied me now watched like I was a riddle. Up front, Camille's mother frowned. Bryce glanced down, eyes frantic. Camille gripped his hand tighter, afraid, unsettled, and lost. And me? I simply smiled. For the first time in years, I felt light. Deep down, I knew no one had the power to make me sit in the last row anymore. As the wedding music faded and the clapping thinned, the man at my side tipped his head and spoke softly, "Just for me. We finally meet again, Mabel." I lifted my face to ask who he was, and the slant of afternoon light across his silver hair revealed deep blue eyes. The exact blue I'd memorized half a century ago. I froze. The sound around us music. Chatter fell away until only his face remained. "Sebastian." My voice caught in my chest. He smiled and nodded slowly. "Call me Seb, the way you used to." I could hardly breathe. That name, I hadn't spoken it in 50 years. I thought I'd forgotten, but memories don't die. They only sleep. We stayed quiet for a few minutes as the clapping dwindled and the crowd drifted off. I noticed his hands still holding mine warm, steady, as if no years had passed at all. "You've changed a lot, but your eyes haven't," Seb said gently, his voice deeper and a touch rough with age. "When the minister read the vows, you still bit your lip." I saw. I laughed through a tight throat, embarrassed and moved. "You remember things like that?" "I don't forget anything about you, Mabel. Especially the things that once made life feel meaningful." I looked away, hiding the tear that had slipped free. As people began to scatter, Seb said, "Walk with me. I've got a lot to tell you." I nodded. We left the reception and wandered into the garden behind the mansion, where rows of lavender perfumed the evening breeze. Voices and laughter faded, leaving only the soft crunch of our shoes on gravel. I looked for you for years, Seb began, eyes straight ahead. That year, I went to London for a business program. I thought I'd be gone a few months. I wrote you dozens of letters, sometimes one every week, sent to your old home address. I stopped. A breeze shivered across my shoulders. I never got a single one. Seb turned, his eyes filling with shock and a deep sadness. Not one. No calls, no messages. I shook my head. Not a word. I thought you'd forgotten me or found someone else. My mother told me you were the kind of man who only cared about money. Seb closed his eyes, exhaling hard. Margaret, I suspected. When I came back, I called and was told you'd moved with no forwarding address. I went to the house, but they said it had been sold. I was quiet. His words falling like rain on a field of parched memories. Loose pieces slid into place. Years of waiting for letters that never came. My mother's refrain. Marry someone stable. Don't be foolish for love. I whispered, almost confessing. She hid everything. She even erased the messages on the landline. I was naive and believed you'd moved on. Then I met Harold, kind, steady, safe, and convinced myself it was for the best. Seb stepped closer, eyes glassy. I came back to Chicago twice after that. Once in 1978, then in 1980. The first time I hired someone to find you, but you were married. The second time I saw your wedding photo in the paper and knew I was too late. I gave a small aching smile. 50 years late, Seb. Maybe fate kept a sliver of mercy for us. He nodded, voice rough. I never married. There were a few women, but I couldn't keep going when I kept comparing them to you. For years, I read about you, your teaching awards, the students you helped. You were always the person I believed would change the world. Quietly, but for real. I turned away, not wanting him to see my red eyes. Thank you. But I was just a regular teacher. My life was calm, safe. Only sometimes in the middle of the night, I wondered if your letters had reached me, would I be sitting here with you now? Sebbed my arm lightly. Don't blame yourself, Mabel. We did what we thought was right. I only regret we let someone else decide for us. The words lodged in my throat. I thought of my mother, strict, controlling, obsessed with the safest path. I loved her and I resented her. Because of her, my life turned a different way. We stopped by a small garden pond, its surface catching the late sun. Seb sat on a stone bench and motioned for me to join him. He pulled a small object from his pocket, an old photo with yellowed edges. A young woman with brown hair smiled brightly, holding a fistful of wildflowers. I've carried this since 1972. My hands shook as I took it. I thought you'd have thrown this away long ago. No, he said with a soft smile. I once thought if I kept it, I'd never love anyone else. Then I realized letting go isn't forgetting. It's accepting that love can exist even when the person isn't there. I looked down at the photo, my voice small. I loved Harold Seb truly. But he never saw me the way you did. Our marriage was peaceful, responsible, affectionate, but it didn't have a spark. Maybe I learned to live without being seen. Seb pressed a hand to his chest. And I saw. Camille froze like she'd been slapped. Bryce reached out, trying to ease the moment, but Seb went on before they could speak. I watched from start to finish a mother pushed to the last row at her own son's wedding. Humiliation dressed up as honor and money. I heard Bryce take a sharp breath. No, you've got it wrong, he said quickly. It was just a seating mix-up. Staff placed the rows wrong. There was no intent. I faced my son and held his eyes. A mix-up or a choice, Bryce? He went quiet. For me, that question needed no answer. Camille jumped in, scrambling to salvage control. Mabel, I think you're being too sensitive. Everyone was busy and you know our family's reputation had to be protected. Reputation. Seb cut in, still polite but cool. If your reputation is built on diminishing others, you might want to revisit your definition. Color rose beneath Camille's makeup. Whether from shame or anger didn't matter. Bryce looked lost. Fingers tight around his glass. He glanced at me as if asking me not to make this worse. This time I didn't rescue them. Seb slid a hand into his pocket, speaking slowly with the weight of power he didn't need to flaunt. As it happens, I just finalized a deal 2 weeks ago. My firm Whitmore Capital acquired the downtown commercial building where Devon Really Group has its headquarters. The air changed instantly. Bryce's head snapped up. Camille looked like she didn't trust her ears. What did you say? She stammered. The building on Michigan Avenue? Seb nodded, gaze calm, to the point of merciless. That's right. The deal closed last week. I only remembered the detail when I saw the Devon logo on the wedding stage. Silence crashed over the garden. Camille's face drained, her expensive makeup no match for raw panic. Bryce stood still, mind racing. Seb looked at them, his voice quiet. No need to raise it. I hadn't planned to discuss business here, but perhaps this coincidence is well timed. Then he turned to me, the gentle smile returning. Mabel, it's been a long day. We should leave. There's a place by the lake I'd like to take you to dinner if you're willing. I smiled, no hesitation. I'd like that. Camille's eyes widened. You're leaving in the middle of the reception. People are waiting for the family photos. I turned, answering softly but clearly. Family? Are you sure that's what you want to capture? A mother parked by the service station. Bryce drew a breath, ready to say something, but I stepped forward slower and firmer than I'd ever been. I'm not an obligation for you to manage anymore, Bryce. From now on, I choose my own place. Seb held out his hand. I placed mine in his and a strange steadiness spread through me. Simple, but the whole garden seemed to hold its breath. As we walked away, whispers trailed behind. Curiosity edged with respect. Someone murmured just loud enough for me to catch. Is that really Sebastian Whitmore? And he's with the groom's mother? I can't believe it. If so, the Devons are in trouble. I didn't look back. I only held Seb's hand and followed the stone path to the back gate. The breeze moved through the maples, lavender, and champagne mingling in the air. With every step, another layer of old dust fell away. At the car, Seb opened my door like we were 20 again. I'm sorry, he said quietly. If I'd known today was your son's wedding, I'd have come sooner. Maybe everything happens for a reason. I looked at him, a feeling I couldn't name. Rising relief and ache twined together. You don't owe me an apology, Seb. If anyone does, it's those who treat love and respect like bargaining chips. He smiled, soft as the afternoons I remember. Then tonight, let me feed you well and talk for a long time, like two old friends waking from a long dream. His car rolled out of the garden, catching the last light on the glass. Through the window, I watched the trees sway and Bryce and Camille shrink into the murmuring crowd. No one walked us out, and no one dared stop us. But I knew, in many eyes left behind, pity had vanished, replaced by something else. Respect. I turned to the man at the wheel and asked quietly, you know, all day I thought I was completely alone, but I wasn't, was I? Without looking away from the road, Seb answered, no one is truly alone, Mabel. Sometimes the one who sees us best walks in just when we think our light's gone out. I sat back, watching the window turn gold with sunset. For the first time in years, my heart beat slow and peaceful and somehow stronger. I didn't know how the night would end. I only knew this. The woman in row 14 didn't sit there anymore. Lakeview Terrace sat right on Lake Michigan. Walls of glass catching the last spill of daylight. Evening light washed the silk curtains gold. Soft jazz drifted in a mellow saxophone threading through the quiet clink of silverware and the low laughter of a few couples nearby. Seb chose a small corner table facing the water where white sails in the distance looked like fragments of memory floating by. He pulled out my chair, still precise and thoughtful, as if 50 years had never been cut away. "You still like sitting by the window," he said gently. "Remember the first time at Romano's? You chose the table by the glass so the light would hit the food just right." I laughed, fingers brushing the water glass. "You remember that?" "Everything connected to you," he said, eyes warm and deep. The server arrived. Seb didn't need a menu. Lasagna with beef, a Capri salad, no onions, and a small pour of Italian red, not chilled. I stared at him, astonished. "That's exactly what I ordered 50 years ago." He only smiled and nodded for the server to go. We let a gentle silence settle. I watched the ripples on the lake mirror the first city lights. It was so peaceful. I didn't know where to begin. In the end, Seb spoke first. He wanted to know how I'd been living all these years. He'd read in the papers that my students loved me, but he wanted to hear it from me. I smiled slowly. I taught English for 42 years. Maybe what makes me happiest is when former students come back to visit. Some bring their little kids and say I'm the reason they went to college. I paused, then continued. In those last years, I was teaching while caring for Harold. His illness stretched on for more than 2 years. Every evening, I read him the Whitman poems he loved. After he was gone, I kept reading as if he was still sitting there. Seb listened without interrupting. Now and then he nodded, his eyes holding a sorrow I didn't dare look at for long. After Harold died, I thought I'd gotten used to loneliness. I went on, my voice turning hoarse, but really, I was just living in silence. Bryce called me every 2 weeks, right on the dot, asked the same 3 questions. "Are you well? Do you need anything? I'm very busy." That tone like he was calling out of obligation, Seb sighed. "I understand. Obligation is the worst form of love. It pretends to care, but the heart is gone." I gave a small laugh, then asked, "What about you, Seb? Did you ever have someone?" He leaned back slightly, looking out at the lake. "Yes, a few. But it always felt unfair to them. No matter how good they were, I kept comparing them to someone who'd gone very far away. In the end, I chose to live alone. Alone, but not empty. Maybe because I always believed you were okay somewhere." That line made my heart pinch. For a moment, I saw the 18-year-old boy again, sitting under the tree in front of my house, notebook in his arms, smiling every time I read a poem. The server brought our food. The lasagna fragrant and steaming. I took a bite. The richness of meat, cheese, and tomato sauce spread across my tongue, and I suddenly laughed. "What is it?" Seb asked. "It's just this tastes as good as it did back then." And I almost cried because of it. Cry if you want. There's nothing wrong with letting yourself be moved. I shook my head, swallowed slowly, then whispered, "No, I don't want to cry anymore. I want to remember it with a smile." We ate and hurriedly, each sentence filling in the gaps of the years we'd lost. When the red wine was topped off, Seb rested an elbow on the table, the light casting a warm gold in his eyes. "Mabel, we can't turn back time, but we can choose tomorrow." I looked at him in silence. Inside me, something both strange and familiar stirred, as if an old heart were waking from a long sleep. "You make it sound too simple," I answered, my voice trembling. "Because it really is simple. Happiness doesn't need magic, only the courage to start again." Before I could reply, my phone buzzed in my purse. I glanced down 7 missed calls from Bryce and 3 messages from Camille. They all said the same thing. Who was Sebastian Whitmore? Mom, where are you? Do you know what kind of man he is? I set the phone face down and exhaled slowly. They've started digging into you. Seb smiled lightly. Of course, the Devons never rest easy when they don't know what someone can do to them. Aren't you afraid? I asked, half joking, half serious. Afraid? I've been through much bigger battles. They should only be afraid if they keep looking down on people. I laughed. You're as confident as you used to be. No, Mabel. I just believe in the justice of cause and effect. Those who sow contempt will bow their heads to reap it. I switched the phone to silent. For the first time in years, I didn't feel compelled to respond to my child right away. A quiet settled over me. Not loneliness, but true peace. What are you planning after you leave Chicago? I asked, nudging the talk away from power and shadows. Seb leaned back, eyes far away. I've been thinking about Tuscany, Annie. There's a small village called Montefiorale. Good wine, clear skies, lavender blooming all summer. I laughed. You don't have a house there. He chuckled back. I'll buy one. We both laughed freely, not tamped down by politeness or fear of judgment. I realized it had been a very long time since I'd felt this kind of positive excitement, not worry, but the anticipation that something good might come. After the meal, Seb called for the check before I could reach for my wallet. Let me, you can get the next one if we meet again. I looked at him and smiled. You just wrote the next invitation yourself. I know, and I hope you won't cancel. At the door, the lake breeze slipped in with a touch of salt and cold. I pulled my wrap tighter, watching the city lights flicker in his eyes. Thank you for dinner, Seb. Thank you for coming. If you hadn't walked to row 14, I might never have had the chance to see you again. I said nothing, not because I had nothing to say, but because any words felt extra. I simply nodded and turned away. When I climbed into a cab home, the phone buzzed again, for more missed calls from Bryce. I watched the screen glow in the dark, then tapped mute notifications. That night, I didn't call back. I sat by the window, looking out at Lake Michigan, shimmering in the moonlight, and realized it had been a long time since I'd felt this light inside. Tomorrow, I'd have to face Bryce and Camille and that world out there. But tonight, it was just me and the calm of being seen, heard, and remembered. And somewhere in Chicago, I believed Seb was looking out at the lake, too, facing the same direction where the lights met the water, and the past finally let go. 3 days after that evening, by the lake, my phone rang while I was watering the plants on the porch. Bryce's voice came through, trying to sound steady, but failing to hide the strain. Mom, are you free tonight? Camille and I want to take you to dinner at River House. River House, the most upscale restaurant in Chicago, the kind you book a week ahead. I knew they weren't inviting me out of filial devotion. I wiped my hands and smiled slightly. Of course, I can go. On the other end, Bryce exhaled like he'd just completed a tough assignment. That evening, the restaurant glowed with candlelight, the polished wood floor reflecting warm gold. I arrived on time in a simple blush pink dress and the pearl earrings Harold once gave me. When the server opened the private room, I saw Camille already seated wearing a French label I'd seen on a magazine cover. Next to her, Bryce scrolled his phone, looking worn out. Mom. Camille stood and flashed a radiant smile like nothing had ever happened between us. You look wonderful tonight. Your skin is glowing. Must be that good company makes people shine, right? I looked at her, smiling lightly, but not too much. That's right, Camille. Good companies, good partners, and good manners. Those things always make people shine. Bryce's hand paused on his water glass. Camille pressed her lips together, trying to hold the smile. We sat a day. The private room felt luxurious, but cold, like a meeting wrapped in velvet. Under the table, Seb quietly took my hand. He sat beside me, composed, his gaze calm and steady. That handhold wasn't showy, but it made me feel strangely safe, like a reminder I wasn't alone anymore. The server poured wine and slipped away. Camille started with small talk, vacations, new projects, charity events. Everything came out in a flat practice tone, like she was executing a strategy rather than having a conversation. I stayed quiet, smiling at the right moment so she wouldn't know how. Clearly, I was listening. When the main course arrived, grilled wagyu with truffles. Bryce set down his knife and looked at me. Mom, I actually wanted to talk a bit about work. I took a sip of wine. Yours or mine? He faltered. Camille cut in, voice soft as fluff, but edged with calculation. Whitmore Capital just bought the building where our company's headquarters are. It would be wonderful if your side could consider keeping the current lease. We could all benefit. Seb looked up, not rushing. He cut a piece of meat with measured movements, then said evenly, "Business is business, Miss Devon. No one gets to change terms based on personal ties if the conditions aren't right." I saw a tendon jump in Camille's neck. Bryce forced a thin smile and tried. "I think things can be flexible as long as both sides want it." Seb set down the knife, a rare sharpness flickering in his eyes. "I'm only flexible with people who know how to show respect." The bra's words drifted out like a breath. Yet the room fell absolutely silent. I straightened, set my glass down, and said gently but clear, "Before we talk business, maybe we should talk about something more important. Respect." Bryce looked at me flustered. "Mom, I know there was a little misunderstanding at the wedding." I cut in. "It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a choice. You chose to seat me in the last row behind the service area. You chose silence when your wife said my poverty would shame her family." Camille jumped in fast. "I didn't mean harm, Mabel. I just wanted the ceremony to look perfect. I'm sorry if my words hurt you." I looked straight at her, my voice low but firm. "Camille, are you sorry you said it or sorry it has consequences now?" I wasn't angry. I just needed a sincere apology. But sometimes sincere is the hardest thing to give. And when someone apologizes to you, what makes you believe they truly regret it? Share it with me. So I know I'm not the only one who's wrestled with that. The question made Camille choke up and Bryce lifted his eyes to mine, torn between guilt and confusion. He took his wife's hand, his voice getting smaller. "Mom, I really am sorry. I shouldn't have stayed silent that day. I just didn't want to mess up the ceremony." "Mess it up?" I asked softly. "More than seating your mother by the service station. You once promised your father you'd never make me feel left out. That day, I've never felt more foreign to my own son." Bryce lowered his head. I heard a spoon gently tap a plate. Camille set it down, trying to hide her irritation. Seb spoke up. Quiet but impossible to dismiss. "Whitmore Capital didn't buy that building to make trouble. But we respect principles. Those who act right will always be treated right." They both understood. Camille slid back into politeness. "Of course. I just thought we're family. We could find a way to work together so no one loses." I took another sip of wine, the tannins blooming lightly on my tongue. "Family isn't a contract, Camille. I don't need collaboration. I need respect." She forced a smile and shifted to congratulating the fresh start of our marriage, but her voice had lost its ease. I listened, but said nothing more. The meal ended in polite silence. Only the distant jazz filled the space between us. When the server cleared dessert, Seb stood first and pulled out my chair. I think we should go, Mabel. Let's not let anyone mistake this for a negotiation. I rose and turned to my son. Bryce, I hear your apology. But forgiveness takes time. It's not something you can propose. He nodded, eyes damp but controlled. Camille stood still, lips pressed tight. Before I left, I looked at the two young people, the child I raised with sweat and the woman I once believed would make him happy. I hope when you say I'm sorry, it's because you mean it. Not because you're afraid of losing a contract or status. No one answered. The table light reflected my face calm. Not angry, not bitter. I turned and walked out with Seb. On the way home, the city blazed. Towers like glass blocks against the night. In the car, Seb stayed quiet, giving me room to think. After a while, he said softly. You held the ground, Mabel. I'm proud of you. I looked out the window, a faint smile rising. Maybe I finally learned what you've known all along, that silence can be stronger than words. He nodded and found my hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. That night, I didn't feel tired. Maybe because for the first time in years, I'd walked out of a conversation without feeling smaller. I didn't forgive quickly. I know forgiveness is a privilege, and this time I won't hand it out easily. The next morning, I was making tea when the doorbell rang. The sound was even slow, arrogant, the kind of a person who rings not to wait, but to command. I opened the door. Patricia Devon, Camille's mother, stood there. She looked just as she had at their engagement party. A cream cashmere coat, a triple-strand pearl necklace, and a smile with more arithmetic than goodwill. Mabel, dear, I hope I'm not intruding. Her voice floated, barely hiding the appraisal in her eyes. You're not. Please come in. She crossed the threshold and let her gaze sweep the living room. I recognize that look from people who live in luxury they don't admire. They appraise the wooden chair I bought at a yard sale. The clock Harold once repaired by hand. The old picture frames on the wall. Everything seemed to be filtered through a lens of money. Charming, she said, her mouth smiling but not her eyes. Cozy if a bit modest. I poured tea and slid a cup toward her. Please. Patricia set her handbag on the table and clicked open the clasp. She drew out a check and set it neatly between our cups. The words $50,000 were printed clearly. I looked up. She smiled, voice level like discussing the weather. This is not a bribe, Mabel. It's simply a way for both sides to benefit. If you could persuade Mr. Whitmore to keep the lease in place for Devoney's headquarters, this is yours. I leaned back and kept quiet a few seconds. Morning light coming through the window caught the tabletop, making the check gleam like a piece of metal. Are you bribing me? I asked slowly. Patricia smiled, tinged with arrogance. I call it an arrangement. Smart people don't use the word bribe. This is a chance for you to help your family and receive a fair token in return. I glanced at the check again, then out the window. In the yard, the rose bushes Harold planted were still in bloom, their scent riding the breeze onto the porch. I remembered his morning's clipping stems, telling me, Mabel, roses are only beautiful when no one pays for them. I turned back with a faint smile. You know, Harold used to say roses shouldn't be bought with money. I think people shouldn't be either. I picked up the check, feeling the thick paper, the fresh ink. Then the sound of tearing filled the quiet room. She startled, eyes wide, but I'd already ripped it into 4 neat pieces and set them on the saucer. My worth is not for sale. Patricia raised an eyebrow, her smile flattening to a thin line. Be careful with grand statements, Mabel. In this society, no one is truly free. Your family, your son, his work, everything can be affected. I stood, walked to the door, and slid the bolt. 3 days ago, I might have been afraid. Today, I'm free. Keep your social influence. I'll keep my self-respect. She looked at me a long moment, her gaze cooling. You're making a mistake. If keeping myself is a mistake, I don't need to be right. A beat of silence. Then she lifted her bag and stepped out. Before she left, she turned back, leaving a trace of Chanel No. 5 in the air. I hope when the consequences come, you still have enough confidence to smile. The door closed, leaving only the scent of expensive perfume and a storm of anger hanging in the air. I sat and looked at the shredded check on the saucer. Torn paper, but the ink still bright. Money is strange. It only has power if we let it define us. I gathered the pieces, dropped them in the trash, and washed my hands under the tap. Cold water slid over my fingers, rinsing away the grime of insult. In that moment, I felt an old part of me dying off to make room for something new, firmer, and freer. I picked up my phone and called Seb. He answered after the second ring. I'm here, Mabel. Guess who came to see me this morning? I'm betting it wasn't someone delivering flowers, he joked lightly. I laughed, my voice still unsteady. Patricia Devon, she brought a check for $50,000. I'm guessing so we can both benefit. You guessed right. I don't think she liked the way I declined. Seb chuckled, a warm low sound that drifted through the line like morning heat. I'm proud of you, Mabel. Plenty of people would take that check and excuse it as practicality. But you're different, I sighed. I don't want my life traded again. I was controlled for too long. Then it's time we do the opposite, he said steady. This afternoon, come to my office, meet Whitmore Capital's attorney. There are a few things I want to discuss with you. I was surprised. An attorney? Is something wrong? Not trouble, an opportunity. Sometimes justice has to be rewritten by the very people who were dismissed. I was quiet for a moment, looking out at the yard where the sunlight lit the roses. Are you sure, Seb?